The first fathers came here at the end of the 3rd, the beginning of the 4th century. This was the dawn of the monastic movement, when monks deliberately went onto the desert looking for places of quiet to devote their lives to prayer and fasting. But the first monks came here also because this was the place where God had revealed himself in a special way to the prophet Moses and to the prophet Elijah. One of the oldest surviving pilgrim accounts was written by Egeria. She came to Jerusalem, and then it took her 22 days to cross the desert and come here. She came here in December of the year 383. And every word of her account is so important because she's describing things as they were in the 4th century. She mentions in the valley there is a garden, and in the garden there is a church next to the bush, and the bush is alive to this day and sends out green shoots. So even in the year 383, she witnessed a fully developed monastic settlement, but also it was a shrine for pilgrims who came from all over the world. We know that the holy prophet Moses had lived here in the desert for 40 years, and then he saw a bush that was burning with fire, but the strange thing was the fire was not consuming the bush, and he drew near to see what this strange sight was, and that is when God spoke to him through the burning bush. This is the place of the burning bush where God spoke to Moses. The whole area was transformed in the middle of the 6th century. The monks had a tower where they could hide in case of an attack, but there were times when monks here were killed by tribes that would come to the area. In the middle of the 6th century, the monks appealed to the Emperor Justinian, and they said, "We have a tower of refuge, but it's not enough for our protection. Please build us a fortress." And he agreed for 3 reasons: to honor this holy place, to protect the monks, and to guard what was still at that time the edge of the Roman Empire. The 2 important dates here are 4th century and 6th century. It's in the 6th century that the monastery took on its present form, with the construction of the great basilica. But the basilica has 9 chapels around its perimeter. There are 3 on the left, 3 across the eastern end, and 3 on the right. Each one is dedicated to a special saint. In 2002, we opened a museum which is next to the church to allow visitors to see this. We would like to show each visitor things in person, but that's physically impossible. So by opening a museum, we can have things on display. There's a catalog of the museum. Anyone can purchase a copy and find out in detail each information about each object in the museum. The most important icons, manuscripts, vestments, and liturgical vessels are all on display in the museum. 6th century panel icons are the oldest panel icons that survive. They were painted in the encaustic technique. If you go to the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, you see the Fayum portraits. They were painted by putting the colors into wax and painting with the wax. Wax is the most inert of all the artistic media, and a Fayum portrait can be 2,000 years old, and it looks so fresh and so new. These were painted in the same technique. They are very, very spiritual, and at the same time, they're very lifelike, more lifelike than the later icons, which became more stylized. Those are the most important things you see here. But there's no end to the importance of the things that we have on display: manuscripts, chalices, firmans, many important things to see when visitors come here. The monastery today is known as St. Catherine's Monastery. St. Catherine was a princess in Alexandria in the late 3rd and early 4th centuries. Angels carried her body to the peak of Mount St. Catherine, and that is where it was known and reverenced by ascetics who lived here at the time, until the construction of the great basilica below in the middle of the 6th century, and then her relics were brought from the mountaintop and enshrined to the church here. In any monastery, you need manuscripts for the services, you need copies of the scriptures. It's natural to have books of spiritual wisdom to guide the monks, to inspire them, and then you have the writings of the church fathers. I think something like this would have been the beginnings of the monastery library. But because the monastery has not been destroyed or abandoned all of its history, and because of the dry and stable climate, the manuscripts that were brought here or written here have remained. A few early histories of Sinai, and we treasure them because they are so rare. The most famous was written by Procopius at the command of the Emperor Justinian. He ordered him to write a work called The Buildings, and this describes all the many buildings that the emperor built throughout the Roman Empire. And it includes the earliest reference to the monastery here that was constructed by the Emperor Justinian. He mentions the great fortress of the great basilica, but there was another historian named Eutychius in the 10th century. He was the patriarch of Alexandria, and he records information about Sinai that is not in Procopius, and scholars are convinced that he received this information from the monks of Sinai themselves. He's the one that records that the monks went to the Emperor Justinian, they asked him to build them a fortress for their protection, and the emperor ordered the governor of Egypt to send the necessary supplies, the engineers, the manpower to accomplish this. When you see the walls, they're so high. They're built of granite blocks. Granite is very, very difficult to cut with hand tools. So this would have been a major operation. It would have taken years. It wasn't built in 1 year. And it's clear that this was built at the command of the Emperor Justinian. When you go in the church, all the columns are single pieces of granite. They're not made up of sections. And when you think, how were these cut here? How were they put in such a perfect alignment? This was clearly the work of the emperor. But Eutychius records that after the construction of the fortress, the emperor ordered 100 families from Thrace and 100 families from Alexandria to come here and to live here and to protect the monastery. These are the ancestors of the present Jabalia Bedouin who trace their descent to the soldiers who came here at the command of the Emperor Justinian. The incredible thing is that the emperor ordered them to come here to protect the monastery, and 1400 years later, their descendants are doing exactly that. They live in the area, they work for the monastery, they're very defensive of the monastery. One who knows English very well told me when I first came here, our bond with the monastery is genetic because they have been here for so many centuries. The monastery has 6 graves, and when a monk dies, they take up the bones that have been there the longest. So they're not in the ground for a definite period. It's by necessity that we open up one grave to allow a new burial to take place. And when the bones are taken up, they are put in the common room where we have all the bones of the monks. It is inspiring to go there and to see the thousands of bones of the monks who preceded us, and to think these are the people who lived here, who experienced things here, who continued the heritage traditions that are here to allow us to receive them, and then it is our obligation to also continue to cultivate and experience the heritage that is here and to pass it on to another generation. The limited number of graves and taking up the bones is not monastic. In Greece they do the same thing, and in biblical times they would do the same thing. We know that when Christ was buried, the body was placed on a stone. At that time, they would wait for the body to decompose, and then they would collect the bones and put them in ossuaries. The only thing that is monastic about what we do here is that instead of putting the bones into separate compartments, we put them all together. So then all the bones are together, the monk is anonymous, and many times we do not know the details of the lives of the people who lived here. These are known to God, and that is really how it should be in a monastery. It is a very beautiful experience to live here at Sinai. We have daily services in the church that was built in the middle of the 6th century. We could take a 10th century manuscript from here and use it in the services because the language and the readings have all remained the same. So the overwhelming feeling that you have here is continuity. We are worshiping at the same place where St. John of the Ladder worshipped at the end of the 6th, at the beginning of the 7th century. And we have his example before us, the example of all the Fathers of Sinai who lived here over the centuries. A place like this is important like a museum, and visitors come here and they can appreciate it as a museum, certainly, but it's more important to appreciate it as a spiritual center, as a place where God revealed himself in a special way, as a place where monks have lived over the centuries and have reached great spiritual heights. Their writings and their example have been the inspiration of Christians throughout the world, and it is a privilege to live at this place, but an obligation to keep this as a living heritage, to pass it on to the future generations, and to try to support everyone who comes to the area. We are convinced that everyone who visits here receives a blessing from this holy place, and it is an awesome experience to live here and then to experience this. It never becomes familiar, it never becomes old. Every day is very special to live in a place like this.